As Margie said, my name is Stephen Fry and I work for Amigos Bravos. I just want to thank you guys for having me here tonight, and to everyone who participated in the survey. I really appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Looks good.
Sweet. So I'm here today to talk to you guys about a project that I'm running called the Wetland Jewels. And we do this in order to protect our watersheds, especially in the face of climate change, and to increase resiliency for our watersheds. And so we do that through mapping, land planning, and restoration. So I work for Amigos Bravos, as I said. As Margie said, we're a statewide organization. We're based in Taos. We've been around since 1988. And we kind of have three core principles to our work. The first is to protect and restore watershed health, which is projects like what I'm talking about today. We do on-the-ground restoration. We help land management agencies like our Forest Service identify and protect areas that are critical to the watersheds. And then we hold polluters accountable, which we do a lot of work around mine reclamation, and kind of like Los Alamos lab, like making sure that the water that's coming out of the lab is treated to the standards that our water quality standards for New Mexico say. And we have engaged in litigation over these things. We try not to, but we kind of keep an eye on water quality throughout the state, especially where we know discharges are happening from these kind of mining and oil and gas sites. And then we build leadership and capacity for the future. A lot of this is water quality sampling. So we do a lot of work with the youth. We have, college interns every year. We do water sampling throughout Taos County, and we submit that data to the New Mexico Environment Department. We've actually expanded to the Gila, which I will talk about a little bit later. We also work with reintroducing beaver and otter to different landscapes, and we've been really successful with that on the Rio Grande. And so those are kind of the three areas that we work in. And so the Wetland Jewels project started in 2016. We saw a presentation on the National Wetland Inventory Mapping Database, which we were kind of blown away by the detail that mapping has come to at this day and age with new technologies. And we thought, well, this is a great tool, but how do we get it into the hands of local watershed users and managers? And so we created this Wetland Jewels project. So what are wetland jewels? So they're a specific wetland or a series of wetlands in a defined geographic area, and they provide several important ecological functions to the terrestrial and aquatic environments, as well as to downstream communities further down in the watershed. And we feel that they're a tool to build ecological and community resilience in the face of climate change and drought, as our state has seen over the last 20 years. So why are we protecting these? We find that wetlands are a keystone element to our watersheds. They maintain stream flow that's essential for irrigation and wildlife. They create habitat for wildlife and ranchland use. They provide clean, consistent water downstream, and they mitigate the risk of flooding by soaking in water, which helps us reduce climate impacts from drought, runoff, and wildfire. And so they're also like the sponges of our watershed. So healthy wetlands soak up that water during the snow melt, and then they release it slowly throughout the spring and summer. So when we have healthy wetlands, our streams are running longer throughout the summer, which is critical for irrigation and downstream communities that are relying on that for potable use. And so I talked about the mapping, and this is basically high detailed mapping that we work with a university out of Minnesota called St. Mary's, and they have this geospatial services unit, which they've honestly become the leading wetland mappers in the United States. They do work in all 50 states, and we've been very fortunate that they have spent a lot of time in New Mexico. But the key part to this is it's not just a map. They overlay the map with a lot of information and a lot of this ecological information. And so there's all these different layers that we can hone in on and identify areas based off of. And some of these are ecological, some of them are societal, some are economic. And so we have all these different layers that we can analyze on a map, but it's hard to choose which layers to prioritize, right? Like, so if there's too much information, it's not helpful. And so we need a way to prioritize which data sets are important to local watershed users. And so that's where that survey came in that I sent around earlier this year, which you guys were very helpful in responding to. And so we we provide meetings like this where we talk about the work and the different strategies we're trying to employ. And we also have it as a way for stakeholders to provide feedback on what they're valuing in their watersheds. And so for those that took the survey, you'll remember these. So these are all of the different things that we can map in order to identify wetlands throughout the watershed. And so for this, we're focusing on the Gila drainages. And so all of these different things are things that we can attribute to wetlands. And that's how we kind of value them. And then so through conversations like this, we've also heard that these are some other important layers to consider. And so we built these in to this analysis. Invasive species is a big concern across the state, water quality impairments, endangered or sensitive species, and not just relying on federal endangered species, but species of concern in New Mexico. Coordination with grazing, we know that this is happening on our public lands, and then traditional uses and recreational importance were things that we took into consideration. And so once we collected that survey, each function that I just showed you was given a score based on the number of responses that people attributed to that to a productive watershed. So this isn't the first time we've done this. We have now done it 4 times in New Mexico. We started on the Carson National Forest, which is up in Taos, where I am. And then we did the Santa Fe National Forest. We're doing the Gila right now, and we're also doing the San Juan drainage right now. And so this is kind of an idea of what on a map it'll wind up looking like, these kind of critical areas that we've identified. And then we build this story map, which people can interact with. And it really goes into each specific wetland and why we chose that, the different functions that wetland is providing, and kind of the better area and more visuals with photos and stuff. And we find that this is a great tool to then go after implementation funding and kind of catalyze the restoration and protection of these areas. So I kind of just said this, but the other big thing is that New Mexico and the Southwest in general is now we're in the spotlight of national attention, I would say. And so for the first time in a long time, New Mexico has a lot of money available to do restoration, both through state programs and federal programs. And so if we don't act, a lot of this money will get pulled back or won't be directed to New Mexico. And so we find that this is a tool that we can encourage our partners to use in order to explain to funders why we chose this area and the impact it's going to have to our communities. And then the other thing is we know that there's grazing and ranches on our public lands, and we have extensive experience working with grazers. Sometimes people say, I would just get the cows out. Well, that's not exactly feasible in a lot of landscapes. It's a huge cultural thing, economic driver for a lot of communities. And so if we work with them, they can get on board. They help keep their cattle out of our riparian zones, which are less destructive. And then it also increases forage for them, so the cows have a better environment to live in and our waters are healthier. And so it's a good success story that we like to tell, because it's usually yay or nay with grazers, and we want to work with them, and we want to work with all communities that are working and living in our watersheds. So these are just some photos of the type of restoration that I'm talking about. So we try and focus on low-tech process-based restoration, which is basically trying to mimic the natural system or how nature would have its watershed if we hadn't degraded it. And so it's a lot of just building rocks into the stream bed, reconnecting floodplain, re-wetting our wetlands so they can be the healthy sponges that they're supposed to be. But it's not so much, cement and heavy engineering and large construction equipment. It's more things that you can do as a group. And we lead these volunteer weekends at our sites where people get to come out and they camp out with us, and they get to help build some of these structures and really just connect to the work. And just see that sometimes nature doesn't need that much help. It just needs a little bit of help to get back going in the right direction. And so these are just some photos from a project that we're doing. in the Carson called Midnight Meadows. And so I talked about water quality sampling. It's a big thing that Amigos Bravos does. We're trying to elevate the importance for this work, because currently with current staffing and budgets, the New Mexico Environment Department only monitors our waters once every 8 to 10 years. So I believe that they did the Gila in 2016 and 2017, but they're not planning on being back until 2027, 2028. And that's a long time for waters to change, especially when we're experiencing fires and different runoff events. And so what we try and do is we monitor every year, and we do it 3 times a year, in the spring, the summer, and the fall, to capture different hydrographs and different flows through the river. And then we submit that data to the New Mexico Environment Department, and they include that in their analysis when they're acknowledging or detailing the level of impairments in our waters. And so for context, this is the data that the New Mexico Environment Department is sharing on the Gila. So 49 out of 78 assessment units are impaired, and 16 of those don't have enough data to make a determination. So that's almost 2/3 of our streams are either impaired or they don't have enough data in order to be accurate. And so these are the things that in the Gila, the impairments that are being recognized. And as you can see, temperature, nutrients, E. coli are, pretty prevalent. You'll see stuff like mercury, lead, aluminum, PCBs, and these are all impairments that the New Mexico Environment is acknowledging, but we're not necessarily cleaning up. And so for these 49, they have these, what they call total maximum daily load assessments, TMDLs, which is basically a plan and like an acknowledgement of what is causing the impairment and a plan for how to fix it. But then they don't have to fix it. It just sits on a shelf. And so that is a little bit of a cause of concern for us. And that's why we're trying to process and kind of elevate restoration in these areas. And so I'm happy to show you guys now, we finalized the survey results, or at least, pretty close to finalization. And this is the results for the Gila. And as you can see, unique and valuable plant communities scored really high, because I think a lot of folks from this community participated. So I'm very helpful. And now you guys get to see that that is one of the #1 functions that we're prioritizing in our sites that we have selected. And so your input was very valuable. And so you can give yourselves a pat on the back for getting that to be #1, I think. And so here is a draft of the sites, which I can pull up on a different screen. But this is kind of the areas that we have identified in the Gila and in the Apache National Forest as well, for sites that we're going to try and restore and protect now. And I can share this with you guys. And like I said, I'm developing the story map right now that'll be much more interactive and have pictures and information on the specific wetlands. But this is just a geographic visual of where these sites are going to be. And so next steps is we're finalizing the input from stakeholders. So if anyone hasn't had a chance to complete the survey, if you take your phone and use the camera, this little QR code right here will take you directly to the web page in order to complete the survey. And then we're going to finalize the jewel locations. I'm creating the story map currently. It'll be out next month, and I'll be happy to share that with you guys once it's completed. And then we're going to do concept designs and project planning on a number of these jewels, and then we'll fundraise to do implementation. And so we have a couple partners in the Gila that we'll be working with, local restoration consultants and engineers, trying to keep it as local as much as possible. And then hopefully do some good work here in the next year or two to help restore our watersheds. And so that's kind of my presentation. Here's my contact information in case anyone wants to reach out with any questions or get more information. And then I would love to show you the locations on the map and get any feedback and answer any questions you guys have on these sites, and how you guys can engage with us moving forward. And so here is the map in a little bit better form. And here's this is kind of the Gila Cliff dwellings, the West Fork, East Fork. And so you'll see a couple of spots that we've identified there. And then we also have a few spaces down here a little bit further south. And again, this is this is just a mapping interface. It'll be much more interactive once I'm done with the story map. And so with that, I'll pause and answer any questions or go into the mapping a little bit more. or however you guys want this conversation to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. And I have a question. Who are your partners here for the restoration work?
So we are working with Stream Dynamics. We're also working with the local Trout Unlimited chapter. We're working with the Gila National Forest team. We're working with the Gila Conservation Coalition, the Upper Gila Watershed Alliance. So yeah, there's a few partners that we're continuing to work with.
And anybody else? I don't see anything in the chat. You can also unmute yourself if you want and ask a question.
You could unmute.
Yeah, Marjorie, I'd like to ask a question.
Sure, Andy.
I'm wondering how there was a recent Supreme Court decision rolling back wetland protections for the, nationally. I'm wondering how that is going to impact your work.
Yeah, so the Sackett decision came out 2 weeks ago. We were following that pretty closely. It did not go our way. In fact, it's probably going to be pretty detrimental for wetlands in New Mexico because they're basically saying that intermittent and ephemeral streams aren't included in protections by the EPA under the Waters of the United States ruling. And so that basically limits like 90% of New Mexico, if we're being honest. And the scary thing is also that New Mexico is one of only 3 states that doesn't have primacy for their discharge permits. And so any discharge into our streams that's not on a waters of the United States is now not regulated. And so the waters of the United States, which are these permanent streams, which aren't as prevalent in New Mexico, those are regulated by the EPA out of Dallas, which we also don't like because it's not New Mexico. And so Amigos Bravos has been leading a policy kind of charge to have New Mexico develop a state surface water permitting program. And so we actually got the legislature to give New Mexico Environment Department $680,000 last year to develop this program so that we can permit and regulate all of our waters. And so the current timeline is 2025 is when they're expecting to have that program up and running. In the meantime, we are exploring a Wetland Protection Act or some sort of other mechanism so that we can fill in the gaps that have now been left in protecting our waters. And so it is a huge concern and something that we are actively working on with other partners in the state and honestly throughout the nation. And so part of what we're doing is Colorado, for example, has kind of been, I would say, leading in their state policies to fill in the gaps. And so they have a program now that the state can regulate discharges that aren't on waters of the United States. And so we've asked our legislature to look at those programs and see if we can leverage those for New Mexico. And there was actually a presentation by one of the directors of the New Mexico Environment Department to the legislature this past Tuesday in Santa Fe. It was to the Interim Water and National Resources Committee. And that recording is online. And I would encourage you to go listen to his comments on Sackett and how it's going to be impacting New Mexico. He took, not everything he said is necessarily accurate. He thinks that it isn't going to have as big of an impact on New Mexico, which we disagree with, but he is taking it seriously in the fact that they are pushing for more regulation that New Mexico has authority over in order to regulate our own waters. And so we really just want Mexico taking care of New Mexico's waters. And so they are putting staff resources and investing in developing this program, which will help mitigate some of the impact. But we are fearful that development of wetlands will take place now, and there won't be any permits to regulate that. And so it's definitely a cause for concern.
There's a question from Elizabeth. Can you show us any of the GIS layers you have for some of the projects close to us?
So it's hard for me to show it for the Gila right now because I don't have the finished mapping, but I can show you what it looks like on the Carson if that's of interest. And I'm sorry, Elizabeth, that I don't have it ready for the Gila, but I'll have it next month for you to explore. But would it be interesting to look at what it looks like for a different landscape just to see what it kind of looks like?
Sure.
Sure.
So this is kind of what it looks like when we have it with the different layers. And so you can see here, if you click on it, it's showing you all of the things that this stream is providing to the watershed. And so it's carbon sequestration, aquatic invertebrate habitat, fish habitat, to headwater stream, stream flow maintenance, and surface water detention are the functions that are coming out of here. So it has 6 functions, and it's about 5 acres in size. And so that's a pretty good sized wetland. And then you can zoom out and kind of look at how that is connecting down to this stream. And that's why it's so important, because all these headwaters are draining down to here. And then this becomes a kind of a major stream going down. And so then you can go to a different one, for example, to like Midnight Meadows is the one I was talking about earlier. This is a project that we're currently conducting restoration on. And so we're looking at this stream and then this coming down, which all feeds into the Red River, which then goes past Cuesta and down onto the Rio Grande. And so these are the type of headwater systems that we're looking at because they're higher up in the watershed, excuse me. And they are, the main, I would say, tributaries to some of our major streams.
What kind of restoration work do you do?
So a lot of it is trying to de-channelize the stream. So as streams get stuck and they don't have access to their floodplain, they rush down almost like a pipe, and water just scours the bed and it digs itself deeper. And so then it really doesn't have access to its floodplain. So all that energy is trapped inside the stream. And so what we try and do is bring that stream bed back up and allow the water to flood out into the adjacent meadows and wetlands and then soak up. And so a lot of it is building little rock structures so that it levels out the stream and then makes these little ponds. And so it's not as steep, it's more flat and like a smoother, kind of more consistent elevation drop. And then the power of the stream is now able to get into the wetlands that are adjacent and soak in, and then that water slowly comes back out through the groundwater table. And so it's just trying to make sure that the water is not rushing out of our watersheds. And so a lot of his structures are like logs that we put in the stream, and it just catches sediment and makes little ponds. And then the water kind of collects and gets pushed back a little bit, and then it slowly moves down. That makes sense. I can show you, I can go back to this photo. So here you can see this is the channel coming down through the meadow. And then right here, it scoured out this thing. And so all that water is now draining to this point and then rushing down. And so here, what we would do is structures like this, where we kind of build back up, sediment's going to rush down here and fill in, and then it'll kind of look like this more. And so it'll be one kind of consistent meadow rather than this huge drainage that kind of erodes out of the stream.
Are there any other questions?
Oh, could I ask a question, Margie?
You bet.
How did you choose the spots in the Gila? Was it based on the scoring that you were talking about from the surveys?
Yes. And so based on the surveys, unique plant communities, waterfowl and water bird habitat, aquatic habitat, groundwater recharge, these are all things that were elevated as important to people that recreate and live in the Gila. And so we prioritize those functions to identify wetlands. And then from that, we chose ones that were geographically larger, so they'd have a larger impact on the watershed. And they're also in distinct areas where we can protect and restore them. So like not next to urban things where it's harder to work. And so that's how we chose them, based on the feedback that we got from the survey.
So partly it was the potential for restoration that
Yes.
factored in.
Yes. And then we work with, like, since a lot of them are on the Gila National Forest, we've now been meeting with their team, and they have what they call restoration action programs, RAPs, I believe is the acronym they use. But it's basically they look at the Gila watershed or the Gila National Forest, and they identify areas that are impaired or degraded. And that's how they focus their investment dollars. And so now we've worked with them to identify which of our areas are in areas that they are prioritizing. And then we can kind of work together to restore those areas.
Hmm.
Do you plan to do the whole state?
We'll see. Like, we're pretty happy with the 4 areas that we have. We would like to continue building this out. It takes a fair amount of work. And so what we're trying to do now is get more projects off the ground and have partners get projects off the ground, so that we can start building in information into our story maps, like this project's done, this one's being worked on, etc. And so it's more momentum for the project as a whole and kind of catalyzing more restoration. So my goal for the next year or 2 is to get several projects going, so we can actually point to the value that this project kind of creates. And then we'll probably look to do more watersheds from there.
Any other questions? Okay, Stephen, thank you so much.
I'm actually seeing a question from Mary. You only work on wetlands in the national forest? No, in the San Juan, where we're also doing this project, there's not a national forest there. So it's a lot of BLM, game of fish, US Fish and Wildlife, and then also private land we're also looking at too. So all different kind of stakeholders. The previous 2 were on the national forest, and this one is kind of on the national forest. We have good relationships with our national forest staff, and they also have management plans where we're able to kind of work with them to have them prioritize protection of these areas. So they'll call them out as areas that of concern, basically. And so we've had success with that, and it's easier to work with one landowner. So if you have some projects will cross, they'll go from BLM to tribal to private to a municipality, for instance. And it's harder to work when you have that many different landowners. And so when we're working just with the national forest, it is a little bit easier to move those projects along.
Yeah, Margie, I have a couple questions.
Okay, go for it.
I think one of your slides showed that you had water sentinels in 3 of your areas, but not on the Gila. Is that correct?
So we do water sentinels right now in Taos County, and then this year we expanded to the Pecos, the Jemez, and the Gila and San Juans. And so we're doing water quality sampling this summer in the Gila. We've done trainings, and if you guys are interested in participating in that, please let me know. We're always looking for new volunteers. We provide the equipment, and we take, we'll give you a tutorial, a training, and then we'll, help you get out to the rivers and take the samples, and then we process the samples for you. And so we'll take care of sending it to the lab and processing the results and submitting it and all of that. So part of, as I said, these rivers aren't getting monitored very often. And so the more we can monitor, the better idea we have of our water quality and where we need to focus our attention. And it takes 5 to 10 minutes to do these water samples. And so if you're already recreating on the river, if you're fishing on the river, are you interested in taking 5 minutes out of your day to find out how the water quality is? Like, a lot of people are interested. And so if we have a lot of folks on these rivers almost daily, and if we can empower our citizens to help us with this science, then we'll have a much better understanding and we can help out our environment department. And so that's kind of our goal, is to continue to build out this program and get more and more people helping us take water samples. And then we just have more and more data to share and kind of highlight, wow, these rivers are actually impaired, or this one's doing healthy, et cetera. And so that's kind of our goal with that program, is to increase awareness and also get people engaged and out on the rivers.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. So my next question kind of comes from, or that leads into my next question, is where do you get your funding, and is it adequate? Probably not. And is there anything we can do to help support you?
So we get funding through a number of different foundations and grants. We are doing adequately right now, which is a nice change. We've gotten a big influx recently because we've been doing a lot of good work. And as I mentioned, New Mexico has risen in importance on a national and regional scale because of our climate conditions and water availability. And so there's a tension here, which causes concern because it's a lot of people coming in wanting to work when they're not from here. And, it's like, well, we should really rely on some local knowledge to get this work done. And so that's the approach that Amigos has taken. We're very much trying to work with our communities and support local New Mexico efforts. And so that has been fortunately viewed positively by funders recently. And so we actually have gotten some good money in the door lately to help support our work, which is great. As for how you can help, we'll be doing different community engagement meetings and things throughout the year, but also when, the Forest Service or the local municipalities have options to provide public comment on different permits or activities in your forest, like those are great ways to engage. Like we can highlight those and kind of pinpoint them. And then if you guys submit your comments, that's super helpful. When we get projects going, like supporting that in your community, and even coming out and helping us would be great. But just kind of staying in touch with us is the best way. We'll let you know when there's opportunities to come out and volunteer or work on something, or come attend an event and give us your feedback. I mean, just submitting your responses to the survey was, extremely helpful. And so now we want to, if you have comments on where these wetlands are or aren't, like that's the type of feedback I'm also looking for now. And so I'll send the slides in a link to where this map is, and like feel free to take a look and look around. And if there are areas that and that you like to visit that are degraded and you want us to put that on the map, like that's the type of feedback I'm also looking for now. Or if there's a site that we did highlight and you're like, that's just not going to work for A, B, and C, like that's also the information I'd like to hear too, because I'm in Taos. I come down to the Gila pretty frequently, but I don't live there. And so you guys have a much better understanding of the watershed than I do. And so feedback on the sites that we've selected or haven't selected is also extremely helpful. And that's the best way I think you can help right now for the next few months, at least.
Thank you.
It would be great to get the information about the water sentinels for our next bulletin, our quarterly bulletin. So
yeah,
I'd try to get with you on that.
Yeah, I'll send you the slides and a link to the map, and then you also have my contact information. I can send you like a quick little blurb about what we're doing, and if folks are interested, they can just reach out, and I'll get them on the list, and we'll move forward from there.
Sounds great. Okay, any other questions? Going once, going twice. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys for having me. And, I'm really am thankful for the responses you guys had. Like, I remember when I got in contact with this group, all of a sudden the responses were like climbing daily. And so I really do appreciate you guys participating and taking the time and allowing for me to speak to you today.
All right, everybody have a good weekend.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yes. Good night, guys.
Yeah,
you.
night, thank you.
We did. I did.
Thank you, Marjorie.
You're welcome.